LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. I've come here this morning hot foot from the BBC studios, the Andrew Marr programme, still a very good programme, but interesting to see just how many of the guests and commentators on shows like that are very much part of the liberal metropolitan elite. And that's why LBC is different. You see, every Sunday morning, across radio and television, there is a plethora of current affairs and politics shows. And on them, we get journalists talking about politicians, politicians talking about journalists, journalists talking about journalists, and nowhere in any of those other programmes do the public get the chance to have their say. And that is the joy of LBC, because this show is far more yours than it is mine. Coming up at 11 o'clock, we're going to talk about the police leaks, or the police interview. You know, Damien Green being accused of watching legal pornography on his computer. He is effectively our Deputy Prime Minister. Should retired police officers be able to talk openly about things they saw and found and give their opinions on once they're retired? Or is it... I mean, you wouldn't expect a doctor to do that, would you? I mean, a doctor in retirement would not tell a Sunday newspaper or do a big interview and talk about a patient's condition. Should there be stricter rules about what police officers can and can't say? And I have to say, for me, with that story, I think it's now more about the way the police have behaved than it is about what Damien Green may or may not have done in his office on that computer. But to begin with, this was the week when the government agreed that we're prepared to pay, apparently, up to 50 billion sterling. Let's get some sort of context on that. It's a lot more than our annual defence budget. That apparently is what we're prepared to pay to leave the European Union. And I wonder, given that tomorrow Mrs May goes to Brussels to have lunch with Jean-Claude Juncker, that'll be quite an event. Old Juncker enjoys lunch and a glass or two of wine. I'm sure Mrs May will be on the water. But she's got to get from Juncker and Tusk and the others, she's got to get a tick in the exercise book that says we have made sufficient progress so that we can move on to talk about trade at the big EU summit, which takes place in Brussels on the 14th of December. That's the one at which the presidents and prime ministers of all 28 countries will be there together in one room. And I'm just wondering, you know, what does Mrs May need to get in return for our 50 billion? And I want your views. Perhaps you think it's a deal with Ireland so there'll be no border between the north and south. And if that's what you think is the absolutely key thing for her to get for all this money, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Perhaps you think we shouldn't part with a penny unless we've absolutely got a free trade deal guaranteed in return, in which case text to 84850. Or you might be feeling a bit the way I am about this, which is that this Brexit bill is way too high. And if you agree with that, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook and comment there too. Straight into it. Matthew from Heathrow. Matthew, I mean, I'm personally amazed there's been less opposition to the concept of paying £50 billion than there has.
Well, Nigel, I think we're going to have to pay that. So we've got to get that free trade deal so we can sort the Northern Ireland issue. Otherwise, unfortunately, I've got to say, we're not going to be leaving. The government's going to fall if they don't get that free trade deal. And to get that, also, we're going to have to pay a monthly.
Hang on, Matthew. There's lots of points there. But surely, by definition, it's not a free trade deal if we have to pay for it.
Well, it's free trade what we got at the moment. But no, it's not free.
But at the moment, you know, we're always hearing these benefits of free trade. We have tariff-free access to a single market, but it's not free trade. We're paying 10 billion quid a year to do that.
And we're going to have to carry on paying that. And I mean, if we don't get this trade deal so we can move goods for free or for frictionless.
Yeah.
Basically, we're not going to solve the Northern Ireland issue, and basically...
I'm going to come on to Northern Ireland, Matthew, in a sec. I'm going to come on to that in a sec with you. But how? I mean, given what you've just said, and I do understand that you know, it makes it much easier for business, but, you know, I look at America, I look at China. I mean, they sell about €500 billion worth of goods every single year into the European single market without any free trade deal whatsoever.
Well, yeah, but it's not frictionless trade. And basically, I mean, the goal is if we could carry on paying what we're paying now, we could get the more control of immigration, what everyone voted for, and also we could do deals with the rest of the world. So
Yes.
We've got the best of all worlds. And I mean, but to get that, we're going
I understand that. No, Matthew, I understand the logic of that argument. I just think that the 10 billion a year we're currently paying and the 50 we're prepared to pay to leave isn't worth it. But let's move on to Northern Ireland because actually, if you think about it, the demands that our bosses in Brussels made, on money we've met it. Basically, you know, they said jump. We asked how high, and they are prepared to accept that number. Not surprising, really. What about Northern Ireland? That seems to be now the big sticking point, is the border between the north and the south.
Yeah, well, basically, I mean, I think Brussels has already said what we need to say. We basically just need to say is we've got to move on to those trade talks to find out what's going to happen to the border if we get the free.
But we can't. Yeah, but they're saying we have to satisfy their demands on the Irish border before we move on to trade talks. Very sensibly, Liam Fox has been saying, but hang on, you can't do one without the other.
Well, basically, what we've got to say to the government, UK government has to say the same as what Brussels is saying, that Ireland is going to have the final say. Once we're on the trade courts, what we've got to get through to, basically, if we don't get that frictionless trade, then basically the UK and also Ireland are going to say it's no deal. And then basically that is when we're going to actually have to revoke the Article 50. There's going to be another election.
And just get on with it.
Yeah, well,
there wouldn't have to be an election, would there? I mean, there would only be an election, Matthew, if there was a motion of no confidence passed against the Prime Minister in Parliament.
Well, but I mean, what's going to happen is if they don't get that free trade, the frictionless trade, basically the Northern Ireland issue is not going to be sorted. The DUP is going to...
OK, so you're pretty worried, Matthew?
Well, then I think Europe, basically, I mean, they're not going to punish us. I mean, thinking about it, the UK is no one else. They're not going to punish us because other people in Europe aren't going to want to leave because they're actually benefiting from Europe. It's the UK, France and Germany what's paying in.
We're paying in.
Carry on.
No, we are. Matthew, I thank you for your thoughts and your views. John from Wales says, morning Nigel, Mrs May must walk away from talks and tell the EU we intend to move on to WTO rules unless they're sensible. There is no exit bill. Well, it's very interesting, this exit bill. I did not campaign for us to have a referendum and to leave the referendum for us to pay a vast sum of money. Actually, one of the big reasons for campaigning was that we'd save a lot of money that we could spend on our own choices here in this country. And it's extraordinary the way that Boris and Gove, all the Brexiteers, have sort of come behind this 50 billion figure. I even saw people who supported Leave in the newspapers writing it's cheap compared to the annual contribution we're making. And I think the government, which after all was elected on a pro-Brexit ticket, is in danger of getting out of touch with public opinion. You see, only 10% of the population think paying over £45 billion is acceptable. And I think Mrs May has got real problems here. And I say that on the day when the Leave Means Leave organisation have sent her a letter. And this is people like Lord Lawson, John Redwood, Jacob Rees-Mogg, saying to her, look, so far and no further. You know, you've promised this vast sum of money. Frankly, you know, we have to break out of the European Court. And if they're not prepared to, in return, give us a proper trade deal, we announced to them that we'll revert to World Trade Organization terms from March the 30th, 2019. So there is a little bit of kickback, but not much. I wonder what James in Clapham thinks. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So,
Nigel,
yeah.
on the Northern Ireland issue, unless I am totally deranged, correct me if I'm wrong, the Republic and Great Britain are not members of the Schengen area.
They're not.
Yes. So there has basically there has been some sort of border control there because there is no Schengen when you can go past borderless.
Mm-hmm.
The European Union and the Taoiseach need to understand one thing. Northern Ireland, it is British. It will remain British sovereign territory. We are not going to have a border down the Irish Sea, because that would then mean the Europeans would have the right to use our fisheries within the Northern Ireland area. I am not having Spain doing a land grab on us. 50 billion, Nigel. 50 billion pounds we have to pay for them to sit round the table with us. I'm sorry, Nigel. 50 billion is too much. And I agree with the last two callers. If they are not prepared to sit down and do a deal with us properly, then we shall walk away and we will go on to the WTO route. And Mr. Barnier, so his comment on Friday that we are walking away from our responsibilities is an absolute disgrace.
How dare he?
I am sick.
I agree with you. The bully boys of Brussels. So it's time to stand up for ourselves, James, yeah?
Nigel, we need to stand up for ourselves and tell Europe one thing. Without us, there would have been no Europe, and how dare he say that we walk away from fights? We don't walk away from fights. We stand and we stay till the end.
James, thank you very much for your call. And James feeling it's about time we stood up and told them the truth. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:15. Mrs May heads to Brussels tomorrow. It's lunch with Jean-Claude Juncker. We have to satisfy them that we've made progress towards their demands before we can move on to discussing trade on the 14th of December at a big summit of all the European leaders. And we have put £50 billion down, apparently, as an offer. I think it's an outrageous sum of money. I know very few of the public support it, particularly as we've got no idea what we're getting in return for it. But one issue that I think really is confusing people, far more than the money, far more than trade, is this question of the border between the north and the south of Ireland. And you may have noticed Donald Tusk was there in Dublin on Friday saying the Irish can veto whatever they want unless they're happy. Now, joining me is the chair of Northern Ireland Stronger In, Tom Kelly. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, what do you think needs to happen from here? What do the British have to do to make Dublin think that they won't veto a trade deal of any kind?
Well, first of all, any country within the EU can veto. You know that from your own experience within the EU. But I think in the case of Britain and Ireland, they have convergent interests here. They're very close countries. They have very close relationships. They have familial ties. There's 5 million Irish people living in Britain. Yeah. I think it's important for our trade, which goes both ways, that we have as seamless a border as possible. And for those of us who live on the border in Northern Ireland, like me, I'm leaving after this show. I'll be heading to Dundalk to do my shopping. It's really important that we have as frictionless border as possible, even though sometimes that seems unachievable.
Yeah, okay, as frictionless as possible. Now, when it comes to the movement of people, Tom, the common travel area between Ireland and the UK has been there since, I think, 1921's when it started, wasn't it?
Yes, but it has been suspended several times. It was suspended during the economic war in the 1940s and 50s.
But mercifully, we've moved beyond economic wars, and we've moved, hopefully, forever beyond the big sectarian wars that we saw. So we do have, free movement. Neither country's in Schengen. It is this issue of customs, isn't it, that really is the sticking point?
It is the issue of customs, because you've got to remember, as some senior police officers have pointed out over here, Nigel, that when you have a customs post, you're going to have someone to protect it. And if you have someone to protect it, as we've proven in the past, it's not possible. The most bombed place in Northern Ireland was the customs post up at the border, between Derry and Newry and other places along the border. And it couldn't be policed with 15,000 soldiers, 10,000 police officers, an array of customs officers. It's not going to be policed now.
No, and as it exists now, there is a sign, isn't there, that says that you're going into Northern Ireland?
There's a sign on the Northern Ireland side which says to Northern Ireland, yes?
Yes, there is. I mean, I thought Bertie Ahern, the former Taoiseach, the former Irish Prime Minister, was very interesting on this. You know, he was talking about using technology and, you know, cameras and number recognition plates of lorries and commercial vehicles. Doesn't have to be absolutely on the border, does it?
Well, I mean, it depends how you look at it. I mean, I prefer there's no border at all, but then I'm an Irish nationalist. But
that's not where we are, is it?
We talked about customs facilitation posts, which is what the new term for these border customs posts seem to be, and they're talking about locating them in Armagh and Banbridge, which is 15, 20 miles from the border, which would be interesting and may not please everyone in Northern Ireland, but that's a difficult thing to do anyway.
No, but I mean, Tom, I wonder whether, and you know, you're a self-declared Irish nationalist, I wonder whether in some ways this dispute is not being used by Irish nationalists to attempt to change the constitutional position of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom.
No, it's not, because people like me have been participating fully in the democratic process in Northern Ireland, and the Remain vote had over 30% of unionists voting for it as well. It had a majority of people in Northern Ireland voting to remain within the EU because it was important to agribusiness, it's important to cross-border healthcare, it's important to cross-border educational projects. There are several bodies under the Good Friday Agreement which were officially established to facilitate trade, to look after our waterways. All of these things, the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement was about getting synergies between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, not having a Mexican standoff the way we did throughout the 1920s to the 1970s.
Well, Tom, can I offer you what I think might be a solution, and that I think nobody has talked about before? What if the British government goes to Brussels tomorrow and simultaneously is on the phone with Dublin, let's have a speaker conference tomorrow, and the British government says this: whatever you as a European Union do in return with us on trade, we will discuss over the course of the coming weeks and months. But we, as the United Kingdom, unconditionally want to continue with free trade and free access with Ireland. We want that not just for the ease of business between us and Ireland and vice versa, but also so that Ireland can transship by lorry, etc., many of their goods through the United Kingdom and on to the continent. This is a politically sensitive situation, and we're going to ask the World Trade Organization, based in Switzerland, to act as a broker for this, and can please the European Union, whatever else they decide to do, if they're serious about the peace agreement and about a frictionless border, can the European Union make an exception for the relatively small but very important and sensitive country of Ireland? How would that go down in Dublin?
Well, I think in many ways that's the kind of conversation that the Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister are actually having. I think that
I hope so.
There is a degree of agreement with them what they don't want to see happen. I mean, I think they all agree that. I mean, they have welcomed papers by Theresa May, even though they've fallen short of what they think would deliver a frictionless border on the island of Ireland. And you're right about Bertie Ahern. Bertie Ahern's position to use technology, and that is all fine for recognisable numbers. But I mean, how many smugglers do you know, or people traffickers, use recognisable numbers?
Well, of course, Tom. And the other point nobody ever makes, of course, is that you're going to do your shopping in Dundalk. But hey, you're going to buy your shopping in euros at lunchtime, aren't you? And you're speaking to me with
That's one of the things that's been kind of missing from the whole debate. I mean, some people have said, you know, unionist politicians in particular have made a big deal out of, you know, we have had the currency border for years. In my involvement with the Chamber of Commerce here, and you've met people in business, and you're a businessman yourself.
Sure.
People who are along the business route in Northern Ireland from Belfast to Newry and to Derry have actually made their towns and cities euro-friendly from the minute that currency exchange thing. So I can go and actually pay euro in a government-sponsored parking space in Newry because we were determined to make sure that the border currency would not have...
So a compromise was found and people were flexible. No, I absolutely understand that. That's practical business, isn't it? And it makes sense.
It makes sense. But I think what also makes sense, and I mean, again, as someone who, from your point of view, has an obvious sense of security, I've been reading back on some of your statements.
Yeah.
When you're getting warnings from former senior police officers like Hugh Ward or Garda commissioners in the Republic of Ireland about the threat to security on the island of Ireland post-Brexit, then you've got to take it seriously.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not particularly taken in by those arguments because I think that...
I served on the policing board in Northern Ireland for 6 years. I certainly would give a lot of credence to them because the cost of violence in Northern Ireland was an extra 1.5 billion per annum to the British taxpayer. And I mean, our history proves that where you get people, and your campaign for Leave was very much like this, when you get people who are annoyed or disenfranchised, I mean, things can turn ugly and they can turn onto the streets. And that is something that we have proven in the past that we just can't manage.
No, I mean, look, the Good Friday Agreement was an amazing achievement, brokered very much by the Americans. Two sides came together. It was a remarkable thing, but it wasn't much to do with the European Union, in my view. Tom, finally, are you optimistic? Are you optimistic that we will find some solution for this border so that the United Kingdom can move on December the 14th at the Summit of Leaders to talk about trade?
I am optimistic that the British government need to get to trade negotiations as soon as possible, and if that means facilitating the smoothest and the most frictionless border they can do in Ireland, that'll be done.
Terrific. Tom Kelly, Chair of Northern Ireland Stronger In, thank you very much indeed. Well, I thought there was some very good practical common sense there. This is not about putting up difficulties, it's about solving them. I wonder what Jan from Bungay in Norfolk makes of that.
Hi, Nigel. I've never understood why we just don't give Northern Ireland independence. Then they can do exactly as they like.
Well, because Jan, it's an integral part of the United Kingdom constitutionally.
It's a part of the United Kingdom that just causes us trouble.
Well, you could argue that, I suppose, about other parts of the United Kingdom if you wanted to.
I feel the same about all of them.
Do you? So are you an English nationalist, Jan?
Say again?
Are you an English nationalist?
No, if I'm any nationality, I'm where I lived for 50 years, and that's South Africa.
Right. Okay, fine. Jan, if the British government was to say that it was going to detach the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, from the United Kingdom, do you know what would happen? The Troubles would start up all over again.
Even when you come to that, Nigel, the Troubles actually weren't anything to do with us. Look, I do feel Britain or England spends its time making up for the past. Now, I presume we're making up Oliver Cromwell and so on from there. The rest of it, to be honest, I don't think the English are very concerned with religion.
Well, no, you may well be right about that. And Jan, I think your point of view that Northern Ireland, over 50 years, has cost us a fortune and caused us aggro, and why don't we get rid of them? I do not support that. It's not a majority view, but Jan, I tell you what, you're not on your own saying that. I've heard it before. I thank you for that point of view. It ain't going to happen, but I thank you for it. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:30. So Mrs May goes to Brussels to have lunch with Jean-Claude Juncker with a bag with 50 billion in it. And that apparently is what we're prepared to pay over. But I'm asking you, what does she need to get in return for that big sum of our money? But first, the Trump tweets, the row, the furore over the last few days, the level of moral indignation that we've heard on our radios and seen on our televisions. And, I said on the day that I thought it was perhaps in poor taste to do this, but I didn't think he had a clue who Britain First were, and I'm absolutely certain of that. And it's led to calls for him to be banned. He mustn't visit the country. In fact, Chris Brandt, Labour MP, even suggesting that if he comes, we arrest him for race hate crime. And I've been thinking about this because on Thursday last week, we did a phone-in on this and the evening show. So, and I'm here from 7 till 8, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on LBC. And we had a phone-in, and it was really interesting that a lot of people ringing in were saying, look, we don't like Trump, we don't like the tweets, but hey, he's the leader of the United States of America. We've had state visits for Hirohito and all sorts of people from the Arab world who perhaps don't behave very well towards women or gays or anybody else. Ceausescu. We've had tyrants come here on state visits over the years, and yet we're trying to stop Trump from coming. And I said at the end of that hour that it seemed to me that LBC listeners were taking a very different position on this to that being taken by the bubble, the Westminster political and media bubble. And very interestingly, LBC did a poll on this. And look, LBC as a station has no political opinions. What it does do, it gives you a variety of presenters with differing opinions right across the spectrum. And I think, in many ways, the listenership reflects that. So, an LBC poll on lbc.co.uk, are you for or against a Trump state visit in 2018? And 28,000 of you voted in that poll. It's a lot of people. And 74% said yes, let him come. 26% said no, keep him away. And I genuinely believe that LBC listeners are absolutely at the heart of what public opinion really is across this country. In fact, some people said to me on the phone the other night, yeah, let him come so that I can protest against him. Which is fine. In a democracy, you're entitled to do that. So back to this whopping sum of money, 50 billion. It's outrageous, in my view. I hope she's going to get something good back in return. I wonder what Jason in Sutton thinks of this. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Nigel. I've got a couple of very quick points to make, and then I'll leave with a question, if I may.
Sure.
50 billion is a drop in the ocean. Drop in the ocean.
Oh, right.
I mean, back during the referendum campaign, you ask any Brexit supporter, do you realise what the cost of Brexit is actually going to be, the cost of leaving the EU? Don't care. I'll pay £4 for a pint of milk if I want to. I don't care. As long as we leave the EU, doesn't matter what it costs. That was the regular response that I received many, many, many times over.
Okay.
So 50 billion, that's the price of leaving the EU. It's not the price of getting a trade deal. That's what it's going to cost for leaving the European Union.
Well, actually, Jason, it costs nothing to leave, does it? It costs nothing to leave. But the Prime Minister...
that we've signed up to over the years, and if we break those obligations and we break those agreements, what other normal country in the world is going to sign an agreement with us, knowing that we're just capable of breaking it and walking away with no penalties?
Jason,
My second point,
Jason, hang on. Let's just examine this. It's a big point you raise. Look, this country has never defaulted on its obligations across the world. We've never defaulted on debts. I mean, many other countries have. Jason, as to what our obligations are and what their obligations to us are, I tell you what, in any reasonable analysis, it wouldn't be anywhere near 50 billion, would it?
Well, let's take the second point. Last year, the City UK put out a report last week. The tax contributions to HM Treasury from the financial services sector in the UK was £76 billion in 1 year. That's the tax contribution from the financial services sector. They claim that if we lose passporting rights for the European Union, which is an automatic given when we leave the EU, because that's what leaving the EU actually means, the loss to HM Treasury just from financial services could be £50 billion.
Oh, hang on. I'm sorry, Jason, this is nonsense. The fact you don't have an EU passport, what you have is equivalence. That is the legal term in financial markets, and we certainly have equivalence, and we're certainly compliant to European standards in every single way.
Correct. Today we are, but March 19th, 2009, sorry, March 29th, 2019, we lose that equivalence as soon as we...
No, we don't. No, we do not. No, we do.
They make any change.
Jason,
our legislation.
We lose passporting rights because we're leaving the European Union and freeing ourselves up to do whatever we want with the rest of the world. But we will have equivalence on March the 30th, 2019. But anyway, go on. You wanted to ask me a question.
I did. You've been campaigning for 20 years to leave the European Union. Why only now are you trying to figure out what the actual repercussions of that are? Why do you not already have a solution for the Northern Irish border?
I do. Jason, I've just given it live on air before the break. I'm suggesting that we seize the initiative, that we unilaterally say to Ireland, we are going to continue with a tariff-free deal with you. We will get the WTO to back up and support this. They have provision within the WTO, for politically sensitive areas. And we say to Brussels, whatever you want to do with us, ultimately, if you're sincere when you say that you think a breakdown of the customs regime could damage the Anglo-Irish agreement, then will you please be grown up, be sensible, and give the Irish what they need, particularly their farmers and many of their businesses?
But that's totally irresponsible of you. You expect the entire European Union to rip up the treaties for the functioning of the European Union, to disregard the four principles of the European Union.
Do you know something, Jason? When we signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement to begin with, and then the Good Friday Agreement, we broke many principles that had existed for centuries. But there are times when, in a very politically sensitive atmosphere, you have to make compromises. And you know, I'm talking about a country of 3.5 million people. You know, I'm talking about 1 out of 28. And I think it is perfectly reasonable to say to Brussels, give the Irish what they need.
Well, frankly, I think you're totally irresponsible.
Irresponsible?
Really? Yeah. Campaigning for 20 years at least you've been trying to do this. Get the UK out of the European Union.
Jason, I don't think we owe them any money at all. And if a small sum of money, a relatively small sum of money was paid just to get them off our backs and to move on to a sensible trade deal, then fine. But it's not 50 billion, and that's the point I would make.
But why do you want to talk about trade deal? You didn't talk about that before during the campaign.
Quite right. I said, no, Jason, what I campaigned on very clearly was no deal is better than a bad deal. And right at the minute, it's looking pretty rotten.
You're not wrong. Brexit's been pretty rotten ever since you first thought of it. It's the most ridiculous thing we're doing to our country.
Do you actually think that being a self-governing, independent nation that makes its own rules, has its own borders, do you think that in itself is wrong?
The government white paper earlier this year specifically said we never lost our sovereignty. We govern ourselves, Nigel. This is the misrepresentation that you're doing.
Jason, I tell you what we're not going to do. That's replay the referendum. But as it is, you know as well as I do that as EU members we have to bow to the supremacy of courts, and indeed we do. There is a court that we bow to in Luxembourg, and for similar reasons, one in Strasbourg as well. Jason, what is your solution to Brexit?
My solution, what I think will happen, is October next year we'll be having a third referendum even, on our membership, saying, look, now we know what Brexit is. Forget all the lies that were told by both sides during the campaign. Now we know exactly what the cost of Brexit is going to be for the economy. We know what's happened to household incomes over the last 18 months or so. And there'll be an option to let's carry on with this ridiculous road to devastate our economy, or let's remain in the EU.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. 1,000 years of independence, valueless. Let's get the bully boys of Brussels, the people that actually stood up and supported the action of the Spanish police against the Catalans. Jason, not only do we disagree, but I will say this. If we have a second referendum, if we do, and I hope we don't, but if we do, there'll be an even bigger margin, in my view, in favour of leaving, just because of the way these people in Brussels have behaved. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:45. Well, Mrs May's got lunch tomorrow with Jean-Claude Juncker. Won't that be fun? And we're apparently prepared to pay 50 billion, but I'm asking, what does she need to get in return for that really quite considerable sum of our money? And there's no shortage of opinion and messages. On Facebook, Jamie says, if Theresa May pays 50 billion, then that needs a vote in the House of Commons to approve it. Stephen says, if business wants this deal, let them pay for it, not the taxpayer. Stuart says, we don't need a free trade deal. We go to WTO, and anybody who wants trade pays the tariff. Kevin's depressed about it. He says we have no leverage because we chose to leave. Well, some would say, Kevin, one of the reasons we chose to leave is we had no leverage within, because David Cameron went off there believing he was going to get some concessions. Had he got some concessions, I don't think we would have voted Brexit. I think he'd been able to persuade the public that we might not, be really in love with this organisation, but when push comes to shove, we can get something back for it. On Twitter, the satisfaction of knowing that we've not done a runner without paying the bill, so we can still be trusted in our dealings with other countries. Well, yeah, I understand that, but it's not 50 billion. I wouldn't pay Brussels a penny, says another one on Twitter. It's not necessary. Well, it's not necessary. You're right. And when it comes to this 50 billion bill, I looked at the figures in the Financial Times in the week. I mean, basically, the European Union thinks we should go on paying money into the Common Agricultural Policy years and years into the future. And what is happening here is Brussels is refusing, as say a family would, whose income had gone down. They'd go on a cheaper holiday next year, wouldn't they? Brussels is refusing to do that, despite the fact we, who pay 16% of all the bills in that union every year, despite the fact we're leaving, they are not prepared to reduce any of their spending programmes, and we are going to pick up much of that tab. Philip is calling from Windsor. Good morning, Philip. What does Mrs May need to get?
Morning, Nigel. Well, I think for 50 billion, she needs to get a decent pudding tomorrow.
A decent pudding.
Two points that I want, if I may.
Yeah.
First of all, the border again.
Yeah.
Last time I looked, we were two separate nations, and the Irish can do whatever they like on their side of the border. They want to release wild tigers to control it, then that's their choice.
Right. I'm sure there's an EU directive against it, Philip, but anyway, go on.
Well, probably, but I mean, the principle remains. It's a bit rich of them to start saying how we need to run our side of the border now. But it comes back to the point about the term unfair has been used in respect to the negotiations. We shouldn't be surprised or upset by however they choose to negotiate. And I'll agree that the smug burghers of Brussels, and I have worked in the Commission and the Council,
yep.
The sense of smugness that permeates everything they do, I find not very pleasant. But I mean, it's how we respond to that that's the issue. You used the term earlier, seizing the initiative. Well, the other side of that is making another concession. And if this is all about self-determination, let's show a little bit of self-determination now in terms of how we present ourselves in terms of these negotiations.
Philip, you've been an insider in Brussels. You're watching this process. You understand their mentality and a bit of ours. Do you think, to date, the Prime Minister has conceded too much for too little in return?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, the EU tactic is just to string it out for as long as they can, because they can see that the havoc that it causes when they do. I mean, the border suddenly sort of sprung up out of nowhere again. And why has that suddenly become an issue?
So, Philip, what do you think? What do you think Mrs May should say to Juncker tomorrow?
Here's a deadline. If we haven't agreed the process by that particular deadline, we're off.
Say it and mean it, yeah?
Yeah, well, you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking like victims in all of this, and ultimately the economic factors will drive the whole process. We shouldn't be shy of standing up for ourselves. And I suppose my other message to the EU would be, once this is all over, and it will be all over at some stage, you've got to live with us, and we've got to live with you. So you're setting the conditions for a pretty acrimonious ongoing relationship, even after the divorce.
Yeah, mind you, Philip, who knows in the next 2 or 3 years to come what other problems they'll have with other member states who might be beginning to feel a bit like us. Philip from Windsor, fascinating phone call. The EU have no intention of negotiating. That is why they keep moving the goalposts, says Laura from Shenfield. Brexit, the sums of money are too great. And remember, it's not a divorce, nor leaving a club bar bill. We don't owe them anything. Also, there isn't any such thing as free trade, only who pays. That's the view of Alf in Halifax. I'm going to ask Michael in Dartford in Kent, what he thinks Mrs May needs to do at that lunch table tomorrow.
Good morning, Mr. Nigel Farage. What a pleasure it is to speak to you. First-time caller to the show.
Welcome.
And committed Brexiteer.
Right. So as somebody who's a committed Brexiteer, are you happy that the government's prepared to pay $50 billion?
Absolutely disgraceful. And it's on the exit bill that I want to speak to you about. The question I want to field is this, and the maths as I understand so far, is that if it is $8.6 billion a year, from 2016 to 2019, it's going to be an estimated $30 billion.
Yes.
With the government now wanting to use a further $50 billion as for divorce settlement, what the Theresa May is wanting to have a further 2 years in the European Union, the total bill is going to be somewhere in the region of 100 billion.
I reckon 80, Michael, but you're certainly in the right direction with this, and this is a point I've been trying to make. So we vote to leave. We vote to leave, or we did, on the 23rd of June 2016. On track, we leave at the end of March 19. That is a net payment of between 25 and 30 billion. The 50 billion on top includes the 2-year transition period. At least that's what I think it means. But Michael, either way, you're quite right. It isn't just 50 billion. It will be, if this is the way it ends, from the moment we voted to the moment we leave, at least 80 billion pounds.
But the point is, and I think that the general public are missing this point, and it's only sort of dawned on me actually only very recently. The general public are under the illusion that it's just 50 billion and it's goodbye. It isn't. It's a further 2 years at least membership fee into this pot.
Well, depends how you look at the transition. I mean, there are some people, Michael, who say, look, actually, 50 billion's cheap. It's cheap if what we get is a free trade deal in return in perpetuity. There are some who argue for that. To me, it isn't free trade if you have to pay to do it. But Michael, I think you're right to be frankly outraged over this.
I am indeed.
Yeah, but there is. But understand, as I say, there is a trade, then actually it's a very, very good deal from the point of view of everybody. I, myself, don't buy into it. But Michael, I thank you for your call. On Twitter I'd like to see a rundown of the money we owe and for what purposes, exact figures for the commitments we have to fulfil, and then I'd like to know what our share of the assets is and how we should be compensated for the loss of them. Carmen, there has been, frankly, very, very little of that. Just figures, almost, frankly, plucked out of the air from what I can see. I've got time for one last caller. Very quickly, Paul in Barking. Good morning.
Hello, Nigel. Morning to you. Nigel, very important to explain to people that the 50 billion is over the 40 years. And if you work it out, it's roughly, say, about just over $1 billion a year. If we was in the club still, we'd be paying in about 400 billion. So we're saving a lot of money on that side of things. And the second point, just very quickly, Nigel, is this. They're going to be pushing now, the Chukwuemungers, the Owen Smiths, they'll be pushing out for a second referendum. Don't fall into the trap. What they're trying to do here is say, we can't be paying this type of money for Greek Wi-Fi for this bill where we're paying for a manor house of the EU. You've got to not fall into that trap, Nigel, because they're going to push for it for next year for a second EU referendum.
Yeah. Paul, I do understand your point that it's supposedly over a very long period, and you could say it's a damn sight cheaper than the current membership deal. Paul, I understand that, but it's not what we voted for. We voted to leave and to stop paying them money. And that, I think, is the democratic point. But look, you make the point very well, and it's very fair, correct and right that you do. And I thank all of you for your passionate contributions on that. Well, coming up in a moment, police should stay out of politics, a former chief constable has said, amid a growing backlash against officers who revealed that pornography was found on Damien Green's Commons computer during an investigation 9 years ago. That's what Sir Peter Fahey, the former chief constable of Greater Manchester Police, has said about the raid on Green's office. And I have to say, I think now I want police to sign non-disclosure agreements so that they keep information like that private, not just during their careers, but during their retirements as well. That's how I feel. Or is it gagging the police? Am I wrong? Call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me at 84850. Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch me on Facebook, and I'm live from London next.